and thank you for joining Therapy Chat. This is our second session. I'm Dr. Parks with Phoenix Behavioral Health, and today we're going to be talking about stress management and mindfulness. If we don't have enough time to get to mindfulness, that will be our topic for next week, but we'll try and at least get a little bit of mindfulness into this session too. Just as last week, Coach Derek is joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And let's first start talking about stress and what it is. Everyone experiences stress at some point or another, and it's a completely normal response. But stress becomes a problem when it interferes with our daily functioning, our day-to-day things that we normally would do. It becomes so overwhelming that it's really difficult to function as we normally would. But Derek, I'm sure you see clients, a lot of your clients probably, who do experience some level of stress.
Definitely, for sure. And the key point is to differentiate between normal, typical, everyday stress and when it starts to essentially impede everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
Because normal stress, we can basically manage it on our own and be reminded that, it's going to be okay. Typical situations of that include, an upcoming test, an appointment next week, an event in the future. But when it turns into situations where someone doesn't want to get out of bed, becomes depressed, has a gradual but marked decline in mood over a period of time, that's when I, as my duty and personal responsibility, have to refer to a counselor or a therapist or otherwise trained professional, because then it's becoming a disorder and it's disrupting everyday life. The main characteristic of a psychological disorder is when it interferes with everyday life and it, blocks that typical level of functioning. But it's typically future events that we're concerned with.
Okay. So we can define stress as really any change, right? And our response to that change, and it could be emotional, it could be a physical stress, it could be psychological.
Right.
And just as you were saying, everyone experiences some level of stress, and it's a totally normal experience.
For sure.
We're going to look at our first graphic that lists some things that could be described as stresses, some of the more common stresses. And when we look at that graphic, we see, right at the top, the death of a loved one, divorce, separation, any changes in the family unit, losing a job, big one. Any changes in financial obligations, that can bring a lot of stress. Realizing that I don't have a job, I'm not earning as much money as I would normally.
For sure.
Just bought a house perhaps, and we're really tight for money, or we have an addition to the family, all of those types of things. Changing your life because of circumstances that really are not under your control.
Yeah.
Chronic illness, injury, taking care of an elderly or a sick family member. That's a lot of changes involved in all of those things. And a traumatic event, natural disasters, theft, rape, violence against yourself or a loved one.
True.
And we could probably add to that list. So what happens if the amount of stress that we are dealing with gets to a point where it does interfere with our day-to-day functioning?
A lot of these stresses tend to have a snowball effect with them, and everybody has a different way of handling grief. Sometimes, somebody might be in denial of it. some people might show all the signs of stress right away and say, excuse me, but I can't deal with this right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in the best shape to deal with this. But when these events happen, and that is not an all-inclusive, bliss, by the way. Everybody has a different set of stresses. Everybody has a different way of responding to things. There's a lot of different factors. Could be upbringing, could be life experiences that affects what they respond to, because stress is a symptom of a larger problem, something has provoked that person to have physiological changes, that are shown where they, are exhibiting the signs of having an issue to something. But when we identify those factors, I myself as a coach see where they're at.
Yeah.
Some people, who lost a job might say, it bothers me. It makes me angry. It stresses me out. It makes me sad. But I have another job lined up, and then we can, move on to the next thing, and then we can, make sure that none of the areas are affected that would normally affect that department of a person's well-being or livelihood in a way, like making sure that, that they have a good family to support. Because I, as a coach, like to identify support systems that people have. So they lost the job, they got a new one, but I also make sure that, someone's supporting them along the way in case something were to happen. Because there's a lot of things in life that are not fully guaranteed, and that's one of them. If, on the other hand, it is bothering them, then I like to refer out to a counselor or a therapist, and I, like to make sure that they're getting the right treatment in a way. And I like to, I like to know what the therapist or the counselor says, because it also shapes my understanding, because, I'm learning things as well. So I like to see what's said during the referral, when they refer it out. And then I like to see how the client is dealing with it at the same time. And thankfully, I have to say I've seen a lot of success stories when dealing with counselors or therapists, because I don't know everything. I don't claim to know everything. If anything, I want to know or see actually what happens, that the client is having the best outcome possible. So there are times when you let the counselor or the therapist or the licensed professional shine, and you take a back seat for a minute. When they're at a point where they're doing better, then you can work with them, because it wouldn't be a disorder, it wouldn't be affecting everyday life at that point. It would just be part of shaping in the right direction, and you'd ask the questions, what are you going to do before the next event? How are you going to get better sleep that night? What are you going to do so it doesn't affect you? One technique I was shown by a professional therapist was the least amount of tension necessary, where you bulk up and then you just let it go. And then that's one of the best ways that I've seen clients deal with stress, is to just embrace, but at the same time, just let it go, and just try to not let it bother you for a period of time. But at the same time, not ignoring or not submerging that emotion. We're all human beings. We all have emotions. But at the same time, sometimes you tense up and then let it go. And it's part of a physiological routine, because, stress can be psychosomatic. It can be shown in shaking, drumming the fingers, sitting in a very tense position. But when the stress is identified, embraced, and then released, then you can get to the next point and worry about different things and come up with solutions. Because when you're nervous, your mind is cloudy, and your ideas aren't flowing correctly, so you're not in a peak performance state, and that's the problem.
So, just want to underline one important thing. We already mentioned it at the beginning, that the stress response is a very normal, healthy response. The key word is that when it becomes out of control and interferes with day-to-day functioning.
Yes.
So with a stress response, we have a change, we have a trigger, something happens, and this response is triggered, and we get a shot, an increase of adrenaline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be really helpful. That stress response is what, a lot of people know as the fight or flight response, right? So we're in a situation, perhaps we're driving along and someone cuts in front of us. We're not thinking, oh, what do I do now? It's an immediate response. We have to move out of the way so we don't get hit. So that surge of adrenaline is going to give us the energy to do whatever we need to do to get away from that threat. And the key word is also, it doesn't have to be a real threat. It could be a real or a perceived threat.
Perceived threat, okay.
Right?
All right.
So I could trigger the stress response just sitting here, imagining something that really is worrisome, stressful, scary.
Because
that
you could be
trigger
dipping
that.
into your past experiences.
Also,
I think you're
yes.
saying, right. Okay.
Part of that, yes, yeah. So it's a real or perceived threat. When we have our stress response triggered, we have fight or flight. So I'm in a situation here where, can I fight this threat? Am I strong enough? Am I able to fight this threat? Or flight? Do I need to escape as fast as I can because this is really dangerous and I can't deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a third response called a freeze response.
Where you just tense up and you just
I just,
can't.
That's nicely illustrated when you see a cat catching a mouse.
Mm-hmm.
And the mouse says, oh, I'll play dead.
Well, we've seen that scenario, right?
Yeah. And the cat will just leave me alone, hopefully. Right? So that third response too. Now, typically, physiologically, when we're in that stress response is triggered, it fairly quickly dissipates and we get back to normal. So I have to go and give that speech. I feel a little bit stressed. The adrenaline's going. That gives me the energy to go on stage and perform, do what I need to do.
Sure.
The problem can happen when that stress response is triggered and it stays there and it becomes a chronic level of stress. Because in a chronic stress state, I have a lot of those stress hormones, one of them cortisol, right?
Okay.
That is going to be released into my body, right? And that's not a good state to be in with high levels like that circulating in the body. And we do have another graphic coming up that talks about the some of the physical responses to stress.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot. You may be able to add to
in a
this.
lot of ways for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And there's just, we won't be able to cover them all. It's not an all-inclusive list. It's just,
Right.
you know your triggers.
Right.
You know how it's going to come out.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
These are just some of them. Muscle aches. Just that body feels just achy everywhere.
Definitely.
Shakiness, trembling. Feeling chills, like a sudden shiver, Sweating, excessive sweating is a big one. Sometimes people who are going through a lot of stress, they'll say, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I am just covered in sweat, Feeling like there's a lump in the throat or a kind of a choking or tightness or choking sensation. Cramping. Most commonly in the legs.
Okay.
An increase in heart rate. Sometimes, you may be not actually be aware of the increase in heart rate if it's minor. A lot of people now wear Fitbits and they can see that. And at other times it becomes very noticeable, like the heart is pounding or the heart is racing. It's going very fast.
Definitely.
Palpitations, a big one. Weight gain.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also weight loss that goes with that too.
Mm-hmm.
One way or the other.
Fluctuating imbalance, yeah.
Constipation, diarrhea,
Dry mouth.
muscle twitching,
Mm.
feeling just kind of lethargic. I just have no energy to do what I need to do. Tightness in the chest, dizziness, hot flashes, that pounding heart, chest pain, tingling in the hands and feet, a high level of cortisol circulating in the body can also contribute to increased blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Dryness in the throat, weakness or weight loss, dry mouth, nausea, headache, insomnia, stomach cramps.
And it
There's
just goes on.
so many things. And, someone who's experiencing these things, it's always a good idea, too, to get them checked out medically to just to make sure that there's nothing else going on. But all of these things are very commonly related to high levels of stress and anxiety. There's a lot of them. The weight loss and weight gain, you may say, well, that's strange, how can it be one or the other? But typically, when there are high levels of stress, there's a lot of hormonal imbalances that are happening, and sleep is usually relatively poor, and our ghrelin and leptin are our hormones that tell us that we are hungry, or that we're satiated, or that we're full. And when we don't sleep well, those hormones are not balanced, so that can create a tendency to either overeat or emotional eating, or to really not have any appetite and to not feel hungry. The next part to this, these were the physical symptoms. The next part there's a whole lot of emotional and cognitive responses to stress. And cognitive, just the way we think. Or we may feel that we can't think clearly. Feeling restless,
That's a big one too.
It's hard to sit still.
It's like a pervasive all-around feeling that just something isn't right, and you're kind of fidgety, and you're not just the body too, the mind as well is also
absolutely.
The racing thoughts and
the
feeling that you just can't get back to, you're not grounded, you're not at equilibrium.
And like you said, one of the things we hear a lot is, every time I try to fall asleep, I'm tired, I try to fall asleep, but then my mind is just
something
racing.
Just jerks you back.
Absolutely,
and you just can't. From what I've seen, from what I've heard, I think it has to do with letting go, and because from being awake to being asleep, your mind is going from super conscious to not being conscious. So when you go to lie down, you're still conscious, you know what's going on, but as you close your eyes and you're actually trying to drift, your brain at the very last minute just pulls you back because it knows that you're not supposed to. It says, hey, this thing's bothering me, my health and well-being and livelihood are at stake, I can't let you sleep, I can't release you right now in a way.
Yeah, and then coming into the sleep too, nightmares.
Absolutely.
Very, very.
It's a big one too.
Yeah, very vivid nightmares, feelings of guilt and worthlessness, a numbness. I just don't really know how I feel.
Something isn't right.
I'm just
I don't feel
shut
good
down,
today.
And if you have a family member or a friend who's going through this, sometimes it's a family member or a friend who notices it before the person actually notices it.
Sometimes your family knows you better than you know yourself in a lot of ways, because you have the conscious self and then you have the unknown self. Because you're not, as a human being, you're just at the center. You can't see from another coworker's point of view, or your sibling's point of view, or another family member's point of view. So sometimes they see the blind spots that you might not be able to see in yourself.
Yeah.
They might notice a mood change or a subtle voice change.
Right.
Because they're
Mhm.
playing the role of the observer when
Yeah.
you can't essentially observe be yourself.
Yeah. Um, there's a decrease often in the ability to concentrate and focus. A common thing
Definitely.
that you will hear is someone will say, I usually do really well in my job, but I'm having a real hard time just focusing on the basics in my job. I'm not getting the things done that I would normally get done. It's hard for me to reach a
Exactly.
decision. I don't have the clarity that I normally have.
Mm-hmm.
Feelings of insecurity, feelings of depression, those racing thoughts, lack of motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can feel that I'm stuck and I just don't know what to do next. Agitation, feelings of anger, being
Right.
overly sensitive, right?
Mhm.
And maybe something that perhaps someone had been able to say to me in the past, right now it triggers me and I get really short-tempered.
Because you're not in a state of balance.
Yeah.
Anything
Exactly.
perceived could be true or not, could knock you off balance because you're
Yeah.
not in that state where you can, take it as it is and, relax and release and let go. It's like being on a balance beam or a tightrope because your conscious brain is trying now to navigate all different scenarios, but at the same time,
Yeah.
you're so focused on being or trying to get from point A to point B that anything, like I said, perceived or, true or not, can just sway you the other way and you get knocked down.
And then on
That's
that
the
list,
problem.
yes. And then on that list, we have also defensiveness, kind of tying into that,
Getting angry, getting cranky.
and expecting the worst. And then just to, because we are coming up to finishing this segment, just to look at the behavioral responses, try to go through them perhaps a little bit
Sure.
quickly, but avoiding situations, right? It's kind of like that freeze response that we talked about earlier. I'm just avoiding, neglecting to do things. Might be neglecting my own self-care too. Smokers tend to increase their smoking. Nail-biting behaviors we see. There's a kind of the decrease in things that are relaxing and calming, because I feel too stressed to be able to do that. So you may see, I used to play cards in the evening, or I used to go to the gym, I used to like to draw, and I'm not doing any of those things anymore. The things that I typically like. Just withdrawal in general. We see the increased eating.
Go back into your shell, yeah.
Poor hygiene, teeth clenching. Oftentimes, when there's stress, the jaw is very tight, and you don't notice that. But you can find when you go to the dentist, they'll say, it looks like you're grinding your teeth. There's a lot
Can
of
lead to
tension
TMJ.
there. Yes,
In serious
TMJ.
cases where, you can actually wear the teeth down from it over a
Yes.
period of time. Because a lot of the teeth grinding, too, happens in the night. It's nocturnal.
Poor appearance, just to run through these, because I know we're coming up to closing. Increased spending habits, sexual problems, a decrease in exercise, increase in sleeping, because it's poor sleep, so we're tired.
You have
so
to
we tend
overcompensate.
Yes.
I've seen it
Increased
in clients.
alcohol.
Yeah.
Arguing, skin picking, foot tapping. So these are all very commonly seen.
And it all shows how it comes out in the body, too. That's
Yes.
the thing. It starts in the mind and
Yes.
it manifests psychosomatically.
So we won't have time to talk about some of the ways that we can start working with stress. That will go into next week's episode. And one of the main things that we'll talk about next week is mindfulness.
Okay.
When we're looking at the stress response, we're talking about our sympathetic and our parasympathetic. And when there's increased stress, our sympathetic is running. It's like we have the foot on the accelerator. And our parasympathetic is the brake. And what we want to do is to bring the brake in and slow down that movement a little bit.
So you can reach back to
Yes.
the balanced state,
Yes.
the free state.
So getting your body to relax, even if it's taking 1 or 2 minutes throughout the day, just to calm down, relax, practice some specific types of breathing exercises.
Okay.
Look at the way we're thinking, look at our stressful thinking habits. All of those are major activities that we can do to address high stress levels. So we have to wind up for today's session. If you have any more questions about this session, please give us a call at 508-623-3931, or send any questions or comments to phoenixinfo.online, and we look forward to speaking with you next week.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Derek.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.